and welcome to the Keys to Therapy. Today's episode is all about how to structure your final session with clients. So, typically, the final session is called the termination session, which I don't love. Termination sounds kind of scary and violent, so I think it's weird that that's what we call it, but somewhere along the way, that's what the name for it became. So, I typically wouldn't use that with clients. I try not to use it really much at all, but for some people, that's the term that they know it by. So I'll kind of call it like last session and termination interchangeably in this episode. But a lot of times people, like therapists, know going into sessions, like the first one, going into it, what kind of questions you have to ask, what you need on your paperwork, all of that. Mostly like the interim sessions, you kind of have like some goals, some homework, certain things that you might have set with the client or for yourself, or maybe you're following some sort of like protocol or program. So the outline's pretty much there. And sometimes sessions are just like maintenance sessions where it's just like, how's everything been going? And you kind of go from there. But there's lots of reasons that clients end therapy. I mean, it may be something like they're moving out of state and you're not licensed in that state, or they potentially like changed jobs or changed insurances, and so they might need to really use insurance and now you no longer take it, or their financial situation changes and they can't pay for therapy out of pocket, or maybe they just feel like they're doing really well and they no longer need it. So there's lots of different reasons. Sometimes too, there may be like they may need some sort of specialty that you don't offer, so they may be ending therapy with you but continuing with a trauma focused therapist or something along those lines. So the having a last session with a client isn't typically a negative thing. Honestly, for the majority of us, I think it's a positive thing because it means that the client's kind of like graduated and they've, moved on from our treatment and they're doing really well typically to get to that point, and it's just supposed to be a positive thing overall. So we think that with these sessions, though, sometimes therapists feel kind of lost because they're like, I don't really know how much to get into if it's the last session. I also don't know like what all should we cover? Like, what should we talk about? And I don't want to get into anything like too deep, but at the same time, like, I don't want to leave them hanging. Like, there's not really a lot of structure for people on like what to do with these ending sessions. I know when I was in grad school, a lot of the focus was on like the assessment phase and diagnosing, and then theories, but not necessarily like how do you structure actual sessions and like what do you do when it's the final session. So I will caveat that I'll preface this with and the circumstance I'm going to describe this is like an ideal ending. You both know that it's the last session. You guys have discussed it. It's already known, right? There's some situations that really aren't so positive when it's the last session, or clients don't take it as positively, but for the vast majority of clients and therapists, I think the last session tends to be a good thing. So we're just going to go off of that being the basis. But with the last session, what you want to do is ahead of time, if possible, for you and for the client, acknowledge that this next session is the last one. You both want to be able to go into it understanding that this session's for closure and reflection, and to kind of come prepared for those types of discussions. So if you can, and I always tell clients this, like whenever you feel like you need to step down from therapy, from frequency, or you need to step away for a bit because of something that's going on or whatever else, like let me know ahead of time. And then that way, when it's the last session, we know it's the last session and we can plan for it. And ideally, that's how it works. I know sometimes that's not the case, but again, for the majority in these ideal situations, try to set that up as something like a structure to that final session, right? Understanding ahead of time for both of you that this next one's the last one. And so the next thing you want to do is kind of start the session off like you normally would. Acknowledge that like, oh, it's the last one today. And then from there, just be like, well, is there anything before we kind of reflect? Is there anything that you want to talk about that's happened since last session? And allow them that time to process whatever other issue. Because if there's something major going on, but you really are only focusing on spending this last session talking about it being the last session, there may be like a missed opportunity there for them to process something with you who they've known for a long time and to work through something that's currently bothering them. So I would allow them that space. Most clients and therapists too, we don't need the entire session to process what's happened. So just give them that opportunity to be like, is there anything that's going on that you want to discuss? And give them that time for that. Try, if they do have an issue that they want to talk about, try to limit that to maybe at least have like the last 10-15 minutes of the session for closure, but definitely give them that space if they want it to be able to talk through whatever's going on. Then reflect on your time together. So be like, hey, this is how I typically like to do it. Like, here's what I remember about when you first came into therapy and where you were at, how you were feeling, what your life looked like. And here's what I see now. And I let them know, like, now there's so much more progress with your goals. Like, you've met these specific ones, you've grown in these areas, you've become more confident, more assertive, you've changed jobs, you speak up for yourself, whatever those progress things are, those milestones that they set out as goals or that you've noticed throughout your time together. Definitely use this to acknowledge that, because I know in a lot of sessions we tend to praise clients and be like, oh, that was so great, and give them that encouragement. But I think at the end, looking at it as a whole and saying like, wow, over these last few months, over these last few years, like, here's where you were and here's where you're at, and that's because of you. And really putting that back on them of like, you did this work. I'm happy to just be a part of it and support you through it, but ultimately you did this work. And make sure you're empowering them to understand that ultimately everything that they've created and that they've done has been on them, because an hour a week or every 2 weeks is not going to change their lives drastically. It's really the work that happens in between that does. So just like reinforcing that for them so they understand. It's the end of therapy always kind of reminds me of like the end of The Wizard of Oz, where it's like, well, you had the power all along. So you kind of want that mentality to come through and just be like, hey, you're the one that had all these skills. You just didn't know them yet, or you didn't know how to access them, or you didn't know the best ways to reach them. So we worked on that together. And ask them for their reflection too. Like, how do you feel that this process has been for you? Like, what did you learn about yourself? What did you like about therapy? What did you not love about it? And give them that chance to process what their take was. And you can interchange those, right? Sometimes for therapists, they feel like if maybe the client's a little quieter, they're not going to be as willing to go there with their progress. Maybe they're a little more shy, or they're just like, not wanting to be like boastful or something, even though it's not what it would be. It can help to kickstart that. And sometimes certain clients just really need that extra push and praise. You may be one of the few people in their lives who've been able to see this potential. So this relationship may have been like a very healing relationship for them to build trust with somebody, build trust with themselves. So you can definitely start off the like positivity compliment train. But it's also okay to be like, so with this being our last session, I want to hear from you. Like, what do you think about your time in therapy? Like, what are you taking away from it? And give them that opportunity to share, and then you can share your reflections. So it's whatever goes best with how you work, and also what that specific client likes, needs, wants, responds well to, all of that. So definitely use some time. If they are a child, or like maybe just like a creative artistic person in general, I think it can be really helpful to have some sort of activity that you do, something that they can physically take away. So sometimes that's like some sort of art project. Sometimes it's like a collage you guys make together with what their goals are for the future of progress, or how they see themselves. Sometimes it's something that they're just journaling about, and they write a card to themselves, like thanking the version of them that started this process. Or maybe it's something that you allow them to take with them. I know some therapists will have like rocks that have a specific word carved in it, or some sort of tangible object that's like small, it's cheap, it's more meaningful than it is financially beneficial in some way, but it's just something to kind of commemorate the journey and for them to always have with them. So whatever your style of therapy is, whatever works for you, figure out how there may be some sort of activity that you could potentially do to structure this session as well. And I know sometimes people will go over like, let's write a brag sheet about, what you've done so far, or let's, write some mantras to help you remember and tap into like this best version of you, or whatever it is. Again, it kind of depends on your work. Are you super woo? There's going to be some different strategies for that. Are you very like theoretical, analytical? Then there's going to be different strategies for that. So really think through what you want your clients to walk away from. the session with? Is it affirmations? Is it something tangible? Is it something artistic you create together? So there's so many different options, but I would have that in mind as you're planning your practice or you are deciding, who you're going to work with, where you're going to work, things like that. It's really helpful to have that in mind because the termination session may come faster than you think. You may be like, oh, great, I'm going to work with this client for years. They've got these goals, they seem really excited about therapy, and then they move. Or I worked with the military for years. So it's like you really start getting somewhere with somebody, and then it's like, oh, well, they are going underway for a few months off and on, and so they can't really go to therapy, or they're deploying, or they now got orders somewhere and they're actually going to leave way sooner than they thought they would. So it speeds up that timeline. So it's better to kind of have a couple ideas of what your closure termination session activities look like if you have that. And it might be something that you give them. I know some therapists who have given like cards, and they've written a couple like positive statements and reflections in there. I mean, it's, again, totally up to you. That's a personal decision. Obviously, ethically, you don't want to like give them a big gift or accept a big gift. And my last video was just on accepting gifts from clients. I've noticed that more so than Christmas, the time that clients have been the most giving, where we've had to have these conversations, it has been their last session, because they're like, I wanted to give you this, or this made me think of you, or things along those lines. So you kind of want to be prepared for what that looks like also. But yeah, I think having that ahead of time so you know what your procedures would be way better than suddenly you need them. So develop that too as part of your practice. But yeah, so basically just share your observations, talk with them, process everything, see if there's anything that's kind of left unsaid, encourage them, remind them of some coping skills and strategies and things you've worked on that they can use in the future. It doesn't hurt to have a little reminder. I know sometimes I've even made like a little cheat sheet with clients of like, all right, what are like the top few things that work for you through all of this? Let's put a note in your phone. And that way you have your cheat sheet right there. And then we work on building that together. It doesn't have to be this big elaborate thing, but yeah, find the thing that works for you, your style, your clients, all of that. And then at the end, make sure that you're setting boundaries with that client. Each licensing board, each state, whatever, they're all a little bit different. But for the most part, once a client is no longer our client, we can't really contact them. I know that it's for most of our licenses, like it's not best practice to reach out to clients and initiate that, especially once they're no longer our client. We can't engage in a friendship or social media following or anything along those lines because it really blurs the boundaries. And some clients don't understand that. They think, well, you're not my therapist anymore, so what does it matter? Or I really want you to see how my life turns out. I've had quite a few clients tell me that. And it's hard. It's hard for the therapist too, especially if you've been with this person for years and you've seen their progress and you've heard about all the people and things in their lives. And you may have met some of these people. They've shared things with you. And suddenly it's just done, especially if it's a more abrupt change like a move or deployment or insurance changes or whatever else. It suddenly feels like, oh gosh, like this is it. So that can be hard for us too, because I guarantee like all good therapists will think of their clients in the future. There will be something that pops up that's going to make you be like, oh, I remember that they loved this food or this place or whatever else. I wonder how they're doing. And we're just really not allowed to know. So I think making sure clients understand those boundaries. The way I phrase it is I always tell my clients, I'm not allowed to reach out to you because that can seem like it's bordering on friendship or solicitation. Be like, when are you coming back? Or things like that. That's just really not ethical. But if you want to reach out to me, you can. If you want to send me an update when you get settled in your new place, or if there's something that comes up, and you need a little extra support. Obviously, if it's a crisis or something, like here's the resources. If they're going to see another therapist, I encourage them to follow up with them. And I offer to sign, have them sign a release form, and I can talk to their new therapist and give them a heads up so they don't have to start all the way from scratch. So there's different options that you could do to make that transition or, last session a little bit easier, but absolutely make sure you're setting boundaries with them, because clients don't understand, especially because other medical fields are so different. I mean, I've had clients that have become like really good friends with their OB after they've had a baby, or they have their pediatrician's phone number or stuff like that. And it's just, it doesn't work like that at all for us. So it can be confusing for them to understand. So just make sure that you explain it and the whys, not just like what the outcome is, right? Like, sorry, we're not allowed to talk after this. Clearly explain, like, there's ethical dilemmas. We can't have dual relationships. Once a client, always a client. Things like that, just so that they understand that it's not on us and it's not personal, because you don't want to trigger any type of like rejection or wounds or anything that they may have. Plus, just as a normal person, it just kind of sucks, right? Like, there's clients that we met in a different place, a different time of life, a different location, whatever. We might have been close with them, we might have been friends, or we might have wanted them to be friends with our kids, or whatever the situation is. But or maybe they're really great at their job and you'd love to have them be your realtor or something, but it doesn't work that way. So you have to let them know that, so they don't come back later on expecting something that you're just not allowed to give. So absolutely have that conversation wrapped up in all of this. And I usually tell clients to, if I know that they're leaving because of a reason like insurance or whatever, we usually spend time ahead of time, way before that final session, once I have the news, that we try to find them some sort of care ahead of time so they can make that appointment. They can go ahead and have that transition be as easy as possible, and that warm handoff if I'm able to communicate with that person ahead of time. So I think you want to try to incorporate that too. Once you understand, like, oh, this person's going to be leaving for whichever reasons, start right then planning what that follow-up's going to look like for them and providing them with resources. So I know that's kind of a lot. It seems like, oh, you just have the last session with them. You just sort of talk about what they've done in therapy, wish them luck, and they're done. But it's a lot more nuanced than that. You can get really creative with it. You can get really fun with it. It can also be really sad at times. You might even be dealing with some of your own grief about like, oh, I really love seeing this person. I'm never going to be able to talk to them again. It's hard on us too, because we really form good bonds with our clients. Like I said, we think about them. Even now I'll have stuff that comes up that I'm like, oh, yeah, I wonder how that person's doing. Or I bet they've retired from the military by now. I wonder if they moved like they wanted to. Just things like that. And I just can't know. And it sucks and it's sad. And it's probably one of the worst parts of our profession to, bond so closely with a client and know all these things and support them and help them in their hardest times and see them in their best times, and then just be like, okay, bye, and it's done. So make sure you're also processing your own stuff. Some clients, it's a little easier depending on the circumstances of them leaving than others. Sometimes things may feel unfinished, and that can create its own frustration with whatever system, whether it's like licensing because they're moving to another state, or insurance changes or something like that. Could be really annoying because it's kind of out of their hands and ours. But I think it's helpful to also process some of your own feelings about termination. And it's okay to tell clients that too. It's okay to say things like, oh, I'm going to miss our sessions. Like, I love seeing you grow. Or, I hope that your life turns out exactly like you want it to, because you deserve that. And offering those types of things, like, that's okay. It's kind of the session where we can be the most like personal, and we can share the most about our feelings about them. And I think that can be really helpful for them too, to see that it wasn't just one-sided if it was a good relationship. But yeah, so recap, make sure that you have a process for termination, closure, whatever. Have a couple activities on hand if that fits the population you work with. Have a few ideas of how you would handle it. Potentially even work on your referral list if this ends up, maybe you work in a niche that you notice a lot of your clients end up needing couples therapy or end up needing trauma therapy or something that you're not focused on. Being able to build that list up is going to make that last session feel so much easier for you and them, to know that they're going to somebody that you trust and like and have vetted. Be able to, reflect with them and share your thoughts and feelings, and also set those boundaries with them for future communication, contact, any of that, so that they understand what we are and aren't allowed to do, and they aren't upset or disappointed later on. So, but overall, these sessions are usually a good thing. So like I said earlier, there might be some outliers where the person's really mad, or they feel offended, or you guys just really aren't a good fit, or, you're halfway through therapy, something changes, and now you realize like, wow, I'm not the best fit for this person. And them ending therapy is not like on the best terms potentially for them if they didn't want to go see someone else, but they kind of clinically have to. So there's some other reasons that can make it hard, but I would still say across the board, try to follow some of these same tips that I mentioned. Have some sort of closure, even if it's only been a few sessions. Obviously, it's going to look different than if you've seen someone for years, but talk about the boundaries. Have some of these same discussions, rituals, what processing, reflections, all of it, because I think it's going to be really helpful to make that process just smoother, and helps you build your skills as a clinician. Like I said, in school we tend to spend so much time on how do we build rapport and how do we engage with the client, how do we diagnose them. Nobody really talks about what to do when treatment's over. So I hope that this video helps you and makes it just a little bit easier when you get to that stage with different clients. But if you want to follow along with future videos, go ahead and hit subscribe below. I have a Facebook group for newer therapists. You can join that. That link's below as well. And social media stuff if you want to connect. But I will see you all next time. Thanks. Bye.